Hi, I'm Susan Margolin, and I'm on the advisory board of Hamptons Doc Fest. It's my great pleasure to introduce you to Loira Limbal, the producer and director of the powerful and lyrical documentary feature, Through the Night. The film is a recipient of the Robin L. Long Human Rights Award here at the festival. Loira, thank you so much for joining us and for this brilliant film.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor to be at the festival and receive this award. Thank you.
So I do have a couple of questions for you, though, I'd love this to be sort of, more of a conversation. So feel free to just add as you'd like, and we can just chat. Um, First, I wanted to ask you, what attracted you to this story?
Sure. So I found out about the daycare in the film through an article that I read on an online mothers group that I'm a part of. And when I read the article, the focus was really about the fact that people in the US, so many people in the US now have to work more than one job to make ends meet. And then it was posing the question of, given that reality, who then is taking care of people's children? And the article had a lot of information about the economy and labor, and it had some details about some of the working mothers who are part of the daycare. And when I read the article, it immediately transported me to my own childhood and thinking about my mother who raised us as a single working mother, working the night shift. She was a home health aide and worked from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. And I remembered all of the struggles, around just juggling, right? Care for us and financially, but also physically and emotionally. And then I immediately thought about how many women I know whose reality is like this, or aspects of their reality are like this. But we don't see these stories very often. The conversation about labor in the United States tends to focus on white men still, like the face of labor is a white male. And then feminist spaces don't necessarily always center the issues that working class women of color are facing. And so I was really compelled, I said, well, this is a story that's necessary. There's a lot of people who are living this reality and who deserve to see their lives reflected somewhere.
Yeah, you really do make the invisible visible, and so powerfully in the film. How did you connect with Nunu?
It's a bit of an interesting story. So I read the article, became quickly obsessed with the idea of making a film. But it would be about 2 years between that initial obsession and the time that I would reach out to Nunu. So I finally, 2 years later, after many different things had happened, just cold called the daycare, and Nunu answered. I introduced myself. I said, this is who I am. This is what I do. Would you take a meeting with me? And she said, let me talk to my husband and I'll get back to you. And she called me 4 days later, asked me to come up on a Saturday afternoon. I did. And we ended up spending a few hours together, as she was still sort of taking care of, children and doing her thing. We were talking and getting to know each other. And from that initial meeting, she signed on to make the film.
That's amazing. I mean, your connection with her seemed really deep. Um, and was she hesitant at all at first? I know it took a few days, but I mean, um, what was her thought process? Did she share that with you at all?
Yeah, so she wasn't hesitant, and that's part of the interesting piece of the story was that when I read the article, I reached out to someone who had worked on the piece that I knew because it just happened that I went to college with them, and I asked them to make an introduction, and they said no because they felt that while working on the article, the daycare community had been a little bit like cautious and weary, and they just felt like I don't think they'd be open to working with a documentary filmmaker, so I don't feel comfortable making the introduction. And I said, okay, well, okay, that's too bad. But I was like, okay, all right, I tried, and sort of took the no for an answer. Um, and, then couldn't really stop thinking about it, even though I was like trying to stop thinking about it. I was also trying to convince myself that I didn't really have any business being in production, because I myself have a full-time job. I also have 2 young children. I also am a single mother. And so I was like, yeah, Loida, this is, you're wanting to do too many things. Like, you really don't have any business, trying to be in production. So let it go. But again, it wouldn't leave me alone. And I would be thinking about it while I was doing dishes and, in the middle of the night and things like that. Until I finally, made the cold call. And so when I had the conversation with Nunu, I was expecting her to be a little hesitant, right? Based on what I had been told. And throughout the conversation, I kept sort of reiterating what my intention was, and also that I would be more than happy to adhere to any sort of parameters or restrictions that they needed to place on the process, because I understood that these were people's children. This is delicate and sensitive. And I sort of kept reiterating that. And by the last time I said it to her, Nunu looked at me and she was like, look, like, I'm looking at you. I am looking in your eyes. I know who you are. I can tell who you are. So you just tell me what you need and we'll make it happen. And so there was no hesitation. And we really have become, very, my relationship with Nunu has been one of the greatest gifts of my adult life. I can say that without hyperbole, and so it is truly a really significant relationship in my life, and one that happens really sort of organically.
Yeah, you can feel that trust on the screen. It's you're in the room, and she's, her comfort level is complete, which is, extremely hard to accomplish. So congratulations on that. And um, you know, one of the things that I wanted to ask you was, you've been an activist and an organizer. Can you talk a little bit about your transition to directing and how that's been, and, of course, juggling and managing as a parent, and with a full-time job. How did that all work?
Sure. So yes, before I went into documentary film, I was working primarily as a community organizer and doing youth sort of development work. Although I was very young, this is like, this was my teens, my 20s. And throughout doing that work of community organizing, I was part of an organization in Bushwick, Brooklyn, called Sister to Sister. And we used to do what we called freedom schools for young women of color in the community. And we started to incorporate art and culture into the work that we did. And I think that was sort of the first place where the connection, or the dots, got connected for me between social justice and art and culture, and just how powerful the space of culture is in terms of shifting our understandings, about the world, and combating, right, problematic narratives and systems and things like that. So that connection happened while I was still doing community organizing work. And we, at that organization, started a video training program for young women, and we ended up producing a short documentary together. Then I went on to do some more youth media work. And then my senior year in college, I connected with a friend and started working on my first feature documentary, which was about 3 hip hop activists. Again, so the intersection between, social justice and art. made that film. And in that process of making the film is estilo hip hop. It aired on PBS in 2009. And along that journey of making that film, I completely fell in love with documentary filmmaking. And I said, I'm staying here. This is it. And then I was fortunate that towards the end of that process, there was a job opening at Firelight Media for an office manager. And I needed a stable paycheck at that point. I'd been freelancing for a long time. I also had developed some health issues and needed some health insurance. And so I said, this is perfect. I mean, I'll be the office manager, but I'll still be around documentary film and filmmakers. And obviously, having the chance to work with Stanley Nelson, who I saw as someone who, could really sort of be a guide for me and a mentor in terms of figuring out how do you go about creating a career, as a documentary filmmaker. And so that sort of, one thing connected to the other, but I think everything really has been driven by a deep belief in the power of art and culture to affect change.
Well, we're so lucky that you did make that connection, I'll say for sure. I read in, one of your earlier interviews that you were influenced by the child separation crisis that was unfolding while you were making the film. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that.
Sure. And I realized I also didn't answer the other part of your question around juggling, motherhood and all these things. So maybe I can figure out a way to piece it together because it is connected to this question. Your question really goes for me to the heart of the approach, the aesthetic approach of the film, and what we chose to center in the film, which really was thinking about what is it that Black and Brown, low income, working class women and children and families need to see of ourselves, which I think really informed again, how we made the film and the choices that we made. We weren't necessarily seeking to explain something to people that are unfamiliar with this reality, but rather affirm people who live this reality every day, and to combat some of the isolation and the stigma that it is to be caught in a position where you have to work so much that you can't be with your children, but then to be judged by a society because you can't be with your children, right? And so, realizing that the work that sustains the society in so many ways is done precisely by these women who we make invisible and who we then judge. I was thinking about the film being a portrait that could feel like a love letter or an offering of a little bit of tenderness and, nuance and complexity, not, seeking to reduce or romanticize anything, but sort of to just lift up, that things are hard, not because of any individual mistakes or choices, but because the structures in this country make it impossible by design, right? And my hope is that, in being able to witness other women that might be in similar situations, that kind of epiphany of, oh, I'm not the only one, or oh, I'm not alone, can happen, right? And so that really informed this idea of wanting to create something that could feel like the things that I wish for this community, which would be ease and tenderness and care, right? Because they're navigating so much harshness, and so wanting to provide the antidote to that harshness in a film. And a piece of that for me was also thinking about like the need to see our children being loved and nurtured and cared for precisely at a time when we were hearing, you know, the news of separation on the border, right? Or just numerous back-to-back cases of police murdering very young Black children, you know. And so it's like you're seeing Black and brown children just being harmed and literally being killed over and over again. But then you're, as a parent, still, you know, engaged in the exercise of trying to raise them and nurture them. And so I knew for myself, I needed to see, desperately needed to see images of babies that look like mine being loved and cared for and nurtured. And I just figured like other Black and brown women must have this same need, you know, as well. And so that's sort of where that came in for me.
Yeah, the images felt so, I mean, the characters were so, you know, lovingly portrayed. Can you talk a little bit? It felt like at times that the garden was almost a character in the film, and I wondered if you could talk a little bit about your choices there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the garden became a metaphor for us. You know, the sort of cycles of life and death and resilience, and the sort of the the wisdom that is like intergenerational wisdom. You know, at one point Nunu talks about something that she learned from her grandmother, you know, about putting vegetables next to, you know, flowers and things like that, which, you know, I do think of like as a larger metaphor for life in general, you know, in an obvious way. But it also became really important for us because the garden is Nunu's sanctuary, and that is where she goes to restore and, you know, replenish. And so she's getting that from the gardening, and then but then she's constantly nurturing, you know, the children. And so there's this metaphor of life and planting and cultivating, right, and nurturing that was just felt really appropriate, not only because it was there, but because it's so critical to who she is as a person, you know.
Yeah,
Important for us to.
it felt so organic to the story. No pun intended. So you're, in addition to everything else that you do, you're also a DJ. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, that's the culture piece again, you know, just leaning into the things that I find to be affirming, you know, and the ways that we continuously choose life and choose to find joy and seek joy despite whatever other things we may be up against, you know. And again, music is such a critical part of all the communities. I feel like I straddle a couple different communities. My family is, I was born in Puerto Rico. My mother and my father from the Dominican Republic. I grew up in New York City, very much a child of the hip hop generation. So hip hop is huge for me. And so, and music and all of those cultures is central, right? And it is this place, another space of affirmation, you know, and of restoration. And I also think like an amazing way to build community. And so that's initially what drew me to DJing and has kept me there. Yeah, it feels like a little bit of like a form of therapy for me.
Well, actually, I'd love you to talk a little bit about the soundtrack, you know, because it is so, you know, it's just, you know, just so perfect for the film. And knowing that you're a DJ, you know, it's sort of like made it really clear, your connection to music and then the soundtrack. Can you talk a little bit about your choices there?
Yeah, I would love to. We worked with a fabulous composer, Osei Essed, who is actually based in New York as well, but upstate New York. And it was interesting because I think throughout the film, we were trying to strike this balance between the tenderness that I spoke about without the flattening or the romanticizing, right? And so we were constantly seeking this balance that would leave you with, hopefully, like I wanted every scene to feel very layered and as complex as real life is, right? That all these sorts of different things coexist in everyone's lives, regardless of race or class, and I really wanted to have every scene feel, or carry that sort of complexity that, we carry as humans. And so initially, there was a bit of a challenge around finding language to communicate that sort of subtle nuance and complexity. The film is everything's very subtle, and so subtle sometimes is very hard to pinpoint. um, and sometimes we would end up in a space musically that to me felt too childlike. And I would say, no, we got to pull back because, the children are here, but the scene really is about Marisol, as a mother, or this scene is about this other thing, or, whatever. And so where we ended up as a team, Malika Zuhali Waral, who edited the film, Osei, the composer, and myself, was we created a kind of a triangle metaphor. And within that triangle, we would sort of identify the three main emotional tones, or the sort of sentiments that we were trying to evoke emotionally. And they typically were things that contradicted each other, right? So there might be like exhaustion, faith, and guilt might be like the three in one, and so we sort of use that structure to find common language around like what was it, that we were trying to evoke with each music cue, and which is a really rich and amazing like learning experience for the three of us, and led us to have really powerful conversations. And then by the end, when we finished the score, I remember being at Osei's studio, finishing it up, and I had a moment where I was like, oh my God, this thing does have the complexity and the nuance and the layers, but it does also feel so tender. And I started crying because I just felt a little bit like, had this moment of like feeling like, oh my God, I'm capable of that level of tenderness. So I had a little bit, I think, of a disconnect. Again, as a New Yorker, as somebody from the Bronx, tenderness is not necessarily what I always lead with. And I don't always see myself as being really kind of capable of that level of tenderness. But here we had created this thing that felt incredibly tender. And it was like a real sort of very powerful emotional moment for me.
Yeah, that's a moment of discovery. Beautiful. So one of the things that I also wanted to ask is, the film reveals the fragility of the system in such a powerful way. And I wondered about your work in impact, and what you are working on, as you roll the film out to communities that are, sort of mothers, but to the broader world, because it's very much a global issue. So can you talk a little bit about the impact work that you're doing with the film, or that you're hoping to do with the film?
Yes, I would love to. So we do fully intend to use the film as a tool, and for us that primarily means ensuring that the film reaches the communities that it's about and the communities that it was made sort of thinking about, or for rather, and also connecting with activists and movement leaders who are working on these issues. There are many organizations right now, everyone from the National Domestic Workers Alliance to the National Women's Law Center and everything in between, local groups, state level groups, working at this, it's another intersection of these issues that impact working families, which also does span a true spectrum, and that's one of the things that was important for us in the film, and something I talked a lot about with Nunu, was that, this current system is so cruel that it literally doesn't work for anyone. So, yes, Marisol is working multiple low-wage jobs, but Shanona is a nurse. She's a pediatric ER nurse. It's a super respected profession. It's a well-paid profession. So that these are not issues that only impact low income, families. And obviously it looks differently, and the impact is disproportionate on low income families. But that really, this structure and the system that we have in the US doesn't work for anyone. And it is not sustainable. And here we are now in COVID-19, seeing everything collapse. It's like a complete moment of systems collapse, because we have had these very cruel and unjust conditions for so long. And so my hope is that right now, in this moment, we can do that work of bringing the film to communities, connecting with movements, doing screenings for, policymakers and legislators, and using the film to help people connect the dots that they need to connect to take action and make change, because there is no way forward, right? If we don't address these things. We now know this. People are talking about, women being set back, like an entire generation of women being set back right now, because mothers primarily are leaving the workforce in huge numbers because of where we are, right? And
Right.
like the thing was fragile, the thing was precarious, and it was downright, in my opinion, violent and cruel. And now it's all falling apart. And so if we want to even think about recovery, we don't have the luxury of dismissing this or treating it as a secondary issue. It really needs to be front and center of any recovery efforts that we make.
Absolutely. And, I hope that and I'm sure you will be bringing the film to Capitol Hill, because, people will be able to relate to these stories in a way that, they won't be able to ignore.
Yeah,
So,
well, that's the hope. It's like, it's undeniable when you see it. These are people, everyone in the film, Nunu and Patrick, Marisol and Shanona, are doing everything quote unquote right. They're doing everything that the society tells people to do. Yet they're all in a position where, like, sleep is a luxury. None of them get any more than 3 or 4 hours of sleep, right? And like, sleep
that's
deprivation
not sustainable.
is not sustainable. That is not okay. That's not okay.
Yeah. No, it's the film is such a gift. So, thank you for that, and thanks to your amazing team, because we all know that it does take a team to bring these works to the screen. So, we want to thank you for bringing the film to the festival and congratulate you on the award, which is so well deserved. And we hope that and know that it will be seen far and wide. So thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. It's really an honor. And so when we received the email, it was like just a wonderful little tidbit of good news during really dreary and scary times. So it means a lot. It would mean a lot in any moment, but in this particular moment, it just means so much more. So thank you. And for anyone that watches the Q&A that wants to be in conversation with us or in partnership with us, as I said, we are planning to partner with a lot of different kinds of groups in the coming months. You can connect with us via the website, which is just throughthenightfilm.com.
Great. And how can, when people tell others about the film, how will they be able to see it?
Okay, yeah, that's a great question because the film will be opening virtually in theaters on December 11th. And then it will be on POV on PBS in May of 2021.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you.